All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on something you might not think about too often, the hidden architecture that governs Canada's engineers and geoscientists. Now, I know it sounds a little complex, and it is, but stick with me, and by the end of this, you'll get exactly how this whole system works. So let's start with the big question. Who's actually in charge here? I mean, when you see a massive bridge going up or a new mine being developed, who's the one making sure the professionals on that job are qualified, ethical, and know what they're doing? You'd probably think, oh, it's got to be some big single national organization, right? Well, wrong. It's not one organization at all. In Canada, the real power, the authority to license and discipline engineers and geoscientists, is actually scattered across more than a dozen different groups. You see, each province and territory has its own regulatory body. And right away, that creates this really interesting puzzle. How on earth do you keep a single, high standard for the whole country when you've got so many cooks in the kitchen? Okay, so let's dive into that. The foundation of this whole thing is that in Canada, professional regulation is a provincial and territorial game. This means that organizations like, say, APEGA in Alberta or Engineers and Geoscientists British Columbia, they're the ones with the real power. You know what? Let's use an analogy to make this super clear. Think of the entire profession as a big national sports league. In this league, each provincial regulator is a team. They're the ones right there on the ground, signing and managing the individual players. That's our engineers and geoscientists. They're the ones who grant the licenses, and they're the ones who handle discipline if a player steps out of line. And that brings us to the obvious next question, right? If you've got a dozen different teams and they each kind of have their own playbook, how do you make sure they can all play together in the same league? Who's the commissioner? Who's setting the league-wide rules and representing everyone on the national stage? Well, this is where it gets smart. To solve this exact problem, the regulators themselves, our teams, decided to get together and create their very own national league offices. So let's meet these two coordinating bodies. For the engineering world, you have Engineers Canada, which has been around since 1936. And for geoscience, you've got its counterpart, Geoscientists Canada. Yep, these are our league commissioners. Their whole job is to provide that oversight and harmony across their entire profession. Now, here's a really, really important distinction to make. These are federations of regulators. This means you as an individual engineer or geoscientist aren't a member of Engineers Canada. Nope. Your provincial association is the member. So while every licensed pro is indirectly represented, these national bodies are there to serve the regulators, the teams, not the individual players directly. So you might be wondering, if they can't license or discipline anyone, what do they actually do? Well, they steer the entire profession using what I like to call a powerful non-regulatory toolkit.
And their influence really comes down to 5 key pillars. First, they accredit university programs to make sure the quality is consistent everywhere. They also publish national guidelines to help keep standards uniform. They're huge champions for professional mobility, making it easier to work anywhere in Canada. Plus, they advocate to the federal government for the whole profession, and they conduct all sorts of research to keep things moving forward. It's a lot.
Let's just zoom in on that first pillar for a second, accreditation. There's this body called the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board, or CEAB, and it's run by Engineers Canada. Now, if you're an engineer who graduated from an accredited program, the CEAB is the reason your degree is basically a golden ticket. It's instantly recognized for licensure in every single province and territory. Huge for mobility. But, and this is so important, their influence comes from consensus, not from command and control. When a national guideline on something like ethics or environmental practice comes out, it's a super powerful recommendation, but it's still a recommendation. The actual authority to adopt it and enforce it, that stays with each provincial team. And as you can see, these two federations pretty much play parallel roles. Engineers Canada has that formal accreditation body, the CEAB. Geoscientists Canada does a similar thing, encouraging consistent standards. But look, both develop guidelines, both manage mobility, both do research, and both advocate for their people nationally. They're essentially strategic mirrors of each other, just for different professions. So when you put all this together, this unique structure gives these organizations a really special name, a special identity. They are, in effect, the regulators of the regulators. So what does that actually mean? A regulator of regulators is an organization that provides the leadership, the shared resources, and the unified direction to the groups that do hold the direct power. It's all about influence, not direct authority.
It's about steering the ship, not grabbing the wheel.
Okay, so why should you care about any of this? What's the real payoff? Well, this whole coordinated system creates consistent standards across the country. That means an engineer in Nova Scotia is meeting the exact same high bar as one in British Columbia. It guarantees that professionals can move and work across Canada. It builds our country's credibility on the world stage. And, most importantly, it's what upholds public safety and trust in these critical professions. Look, if you remember one thing from all of this, let it be this. The national councils don't hold the power to license. They don't regulate the individual. Instead, they provide the leadership, the direction, and the resources to those who do. They empower the provincial bodies, and that's how they make sure Canada's self-regulated professions can be both independent and unified at the same time.
It really is like two sides of the same coin. On one side, you've got self-governance. That's the provincial and territorial regulators, the ones licensing and disciplining individuals. But on the other side, you have self-coordination. That's the national federations, the ones unifying and guiding all those regulators. And you absolutely need both for the whole system to work properly.
And all of this leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You know, in a world where our problems are getting more and more complex, and they don't really care about provincial borders, could this uniquely Canadian model, this really elegant balance of local control and national coordination, could it actually be a blueprint for other professions to follow?